Israeli government publishes a report on last summer's Operation Protective Edge in Gaza intended to preempt a UN probe on the war expected to be released this week. Benjamin Netanyahu calls it a waste of time. As Sunni rebel groups continue attacks on the Druze community in Syria, Israel is said to be weighing a buffer zone inside Syrian territory to provide humanitarian assistance to Druze fleeing the fighting. And the African Union summit gets underway in Johannesburg with a range of crises in focus. South Africa issues a temporary ban on Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir for leaving the country after the ICC calls for his arrest over war crimes in Darfur.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the news today. In advance of an expected UN Human Rights Council report on last summer's war in the Gaza Strip due out this week, Israel has released its own internal probe. A 275-page report, officials say, has been in the works since the war's end last year. Already, the UN report has been deemed as a waste of time by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We'll, of course, discuss this, but first, correspondent Eli Ochenberg has more.
Almost 1 year since Operation Protective Edge was launched, and the fight over Israel's actions is intensifying.
The report demonstrates unequivocally that the actions taken by the IDF during Operation Protective Edge were in accordance with international law. Our actions emanated from the need to protect the safety of our citizens who confronted murderous terrorist organization that was doing a double war crime. It fired deliberately on civilians while hiding behind its own civilians.
Two new reports, one by a group of international high-ranking military officials and another by a panel appointed by the Israeli government, concluded that Israel's conduct during last summer's Gaza war was defined by a high degree of restraint and that allegations of war crimes against the IDF are baseless. The first report was written by a commission comprising 11 former chiefs of staff, generals, senior officers, political leaders, and other officials from Europe and the Americas, headed by General Klaus Neumann, the former chief of staff of the Bundeswehr and the former chairman of the NATO Military Committee. According to the group, which received full cooperation from Jerusalem, Israel had sought to avoid a conflict for months despite receiving rocket fire at civilians and was ultimately forced into a defensive war.
Once the war had begun, Israel made repeated efforts to terminate the fighting. The war that Israel was eventually compelled to fight against Hamas and other Gaza extremists was a legitimate war, necessary to defend its citizens and its territory against sustained attack from beyond its borders.
The group further said in the summary of its findings that
Israel not only met a reasonable international standard of observance of the laws of armed conflict, but in many cases significantly exceeded that standard.
The second report, which was handed in Sunday, focuses on problematic incidents during the operation in which Palestinian civilians were hurt or killed. These two reports precede the expected release later on this week of the United Nations Human Rights Council report, widely expected to adopt a far less sympathetic view of Israel's actions. Jerusalem did not cooperate with the UN probe, claiming the Council's decisions over the years have proven to be biased against Israel. The Council's report was even delayed when the head of the investigative committee, Canadian legal expert Professor William Chavez, resigned from his post over Israeli claims that he had worked as a consultant for the Palestine Liberation Organization in 2012.
And with me right now is retired Colonel Richard Camp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Good evening. Great to see you again here with us.
Good evening. Great to see you as well. Well, I can't see you, but it's great to be here with you.
Yeah, but I can see you, which is the most important thing. Colonel Camp, you know, last time you found yourself in the position that you needed to defend Israel, it seems that Israel this time is trying to, you know, look at things from a different perspective and prevent things from happening and releasing a report before it will be accused in something showing its side of the story. And it seems that this time, this is a smart move from Israel.
I think it is a smart move. I think Israel recognizes that the likelihood is that that UN report coming up this week will condemn Israel for war crimes without really identifying the group that did commit the main war crimes, which of course was Hamas. And I think it's a good thing for Israel to put its side of the story and give the amount of detail it's giving in this report, which I've read and I think is, really puts to bed any issues to do with Israel deliberately committing war crimes. Of course, mistakes were made, but that's different.
Colonel Kemp tried to explain to me this really complicated situation because from one hand, we're seeing, of course, Israel and Hamas were fighting in a war in Protective Edge. From one hand, we're seeing Israel that is helping rebuilding the Gaza Strip. On the other side, we're seeing Israel attack the Gaza Strip during Operation Protective Edge. On the third side, we're seeing Israel conducting some kind of talks with Hamas that is accusing it as committing crimes against its own population, against the Palestinians. So I need to understand a little bit how this is being perceived in the international community, seeing Israel in three different positions.
The problem that Israel has, I think, in the international community is that almost anything it does is wrong. It has a huge amount of opposition among organizations like the United Nations, the EU, some individual governments, as well as human rights groups and the majority of the mainstream media. So almost whatever Israel does, it finds it hard to be right when everybody is opposed to it. I'm not saying everybody is, but many are. I think that Israel, in the circumstances it finds itself in, has done the best it can. And it essentially came under attack from rockets outside its territory, from Hamas in Gaza. It sought to try and deal with those without escalating to a major conflict, but eventually the intensity of rockets meant it had no choice. And then, of course, with an enemy that tries to lure Israel into killing their own civilians, in other words, Palestinian civilians, it's very hard to differentiate and to mount an operation that doesn't kill many. And I think Israel was very successful in that, albeit about 1,000, tragically 1,000 civilians were killed because of Hamas luring Israel to try and kill them.
Colonel Kemp, maybe I'm wrong with the feeling that I'm getting this time, but it seems that the amount, let's say, of anti-Israel is dropping or dropped in this specific operation. It seems that Israel, in this specific operation, managed to, let's say, do its PR outside better than last time.
I think that's true. And I think one thing we're seeing as well, which is encouraging from my point of view, is a large number of people from outside Israel finally recognizing the reality and standing up for Israel. And we saw, back in November, we saw General Dempsey, the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most powerful military man in the world, saying that Israel took extraordinary steps and saying that his own country could learn from the steps Israel took in fighting a war without killing any more innocent civilians than they had to. And then we had in February this year, we had a group of American generals came over to Israel and came up with a report which again exonerated Israel from the war crimes. And you've just reported also on the latest group, which I was involved in, the International High-Level Military Group, which consisted of 11 senior officers and diplomats from 7 different countries, including Europe and the US, which came out with the same thing, which said that Israel took remarkable steps. And I think one of the notable things about that report was that the generals there all said that they know of no army, including their own, that take greater steps in Israel to protect the lives of innocent civilians. So we're seeing something different. We didn't see this previously, and I think it's very encouraging.
Colonel Kemp, but one image worth 1,000 words, and to see the images that are coming out of the Gaza Strip, to see the fact that 500 children were killed, to see the fact that houses and houses are destroyed, that thousands of people are living in the streets. How can Israel even start dealing with these images, although it's writing that it did its best to prevent the killing of civilians in the Gaza Strip?
It's very hard. How do you counter an image of 4 dead boys lying on the beach, or of children, lying bleeding with maybe limbs blown off? Very, very hard. I think that what has to be said as often as possible is that the people responsible for these horrors, and they are horrors. I've seen a lot of conflict, but you never get used to it. It's always horrific. And I think what has to be said is that people responsible for it is Hamas. It's Hamas that launched the operation. It's Hamas that deliberately kept the civilians in military areas and deliberately launched missiles against Israeli civilians from their own population. So however anyone might try and spin it, the reality is the people responsible for those horrors are Hamas. Now, it's easy for me to say that. It's a lot more difficult for Israel to effectively get that message out to a world which so often is opposed to Israel and has got huge amounts of media on its side.
Yeah, and it's much more complicated when Israel decides to conduct some kind of talks with Hamas and not Fatah. But this we will take in another conversation. Colonel Richard Camp, thank you very, very much for this. Yes, and right now we're still staying here in Israel. The Israeli military confirmed this morning that a Palestinian protester died in Kfar Malik next to Ramallah during a violent demonstration. Palestinian officials say residents were hurling stones at Israeli troops. The IDF said the man threw a firebomb at the military jeep, at which point it turned to miss the bomb and struck him. The IDF said it's investigating the incident. Yes, we're going to Iran. The 7 foreign ministers from Iran and 6 world powers will join the final stretch of the nuclear talks by the end of this week, with a cloud of uncertainty hovering above their heads, with some already saying an extension will be inevitable, and with crucial issues yet to be agreed on. The historic agreement is still far from inked. Elia Hohenberg, diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, with the details.
With a bit more than 2 weeks until the nuclear talks deadline, reports indicate a serious slowdown in negotiations, while Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is putting pressure on Western powers.
If the other side sticks to the framework that has been established and does not bring new issues into play, I believe that the nuclear issue can be solved and we can reach an agreement. But if they want to take the path of brinkmanship, the negotiations could take longer.
Yet despite the optimism, the Iranian president emphasized that Tehran will not be willing to wait more than a few months for sanctions to be lifted, a key subject which the sides have yet to agree on. In the time remaining until the June 30 deadline, 6 world powers and the Islamic Republic will intensify talks to reach the final understandings. The sides are still divided over several issues, including the speed and method of the sanctions lifting, and the IAEA's demand that Iran disclose all information regarding the alleged military aspects of its nuclear program. These hurdles are worrying some of the parties, such as Russia's chief negotiator, who was not very positive, saying there has been a significant slowdown in the talks, while another Russian diplomat said there will be no choice but to postpone the deadline. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, one of the biggest opponents of the emerging deal, expressed his criticism once again.
To our regret, the reports arriving from the major powers attest to an acceleration of their concessions in the face of this Iranian obduracy. The agreement being formulated has looked bad from the outset. From day to day, it seems to be getting worse.
By the end of this week, June 20th, the 7 foreign ministers of Iran and 6 world powers will join the final stretch of the talks, including U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, recovering from a broken leg.
And I'll be traveling over there at the appropriate moment in the next days in order to press forward at this critical moment of the negotiations.
The leaders faced a rapidly ticking clock in front of their eyes, which shows clearly it's make or break time.
Yes, and with me right now to understand, are we supposed to get to the deadline? As Iranian politics analyst, Meir Javid Anfar, good evening.
2 weeks?
2 weeks?
It's a tough job. It's a very tough job. When you read between the lines, of course, it's very difficult to understand the lines when, never mind reading between them, or red lines or whatever the color. No, it's to be honest with you, as usually conflicting reports. On the one hand, Mr. Rouhani said yesterday that Iran would agree to additional protocol. Additional protocol means that basically any site there's nuclear activity, there's increased inspection, unprecedented inspections compared to level of inspections now. And don't forget, right now there are inspectors going to Iran's enrichment sites every day. But on the other hand, there are concerns regarding, from what we know from reports, that who decides if there's a site X in the city Y in Iran, that there's no nuclear activity there declared, but the Iranians are developing something that they shouldn't be developing. Who decides? And now, and this is just reports unconfirmed. They're talking about committees. So the concern probably is that who sits on this committee, and could these committees be used to delay any inspections in order to cover up illegal activity?
You know, I'm trying to understand who is pressuring Iran behind the scenes more than, of course, the world powers. Who is... because it seems that Iran is going one step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And I wonder who is pressuring Iran to do these moves.
To make compromises or to become...
Yes, to make compromises.
Well, it's the Iranian economy, first and foremost. I think to look at the Iranian economy, the massive amounts of money that the government owes to the banks, basically. And we see the drought. We see the massive amount of money that the government owes to the energy sector in Iran. I'm not talking about nuclear energy, just normal electricity. There's a great concern in Iran that they must continue in order to get the economy moving again. And people in Iran are not investing because they're not sure what's going to happen with the nuclear talks.
So if they're really worried about the economy, about the economic situation in Iran, what, they're afraid that there will be some kind of a coup, some kind of a demonstration, a green, let's say, revolution?
Look, both the Arab Spring and the Iranian Spring, which happened before in 2009, caught us off guard. So we can't predict that. But of course, any government would be worried about its economy when people are not investing, when the number of unemployment is increasing. Mr. Rouhani can't do a lot of things because there's no money. Look, I cannot begin to emphasize, Lucy, the drought that is affecting Iran. The levels of water in 500 cities is reaching crisis levels. Rouhani needs money to manage the country, and it's up to Ayatollah Khamenei to see if he can make compromises to reach a deal. It's not Rouhani's decision, it's Ayatollah Khamenei.
Let's see how much Ayatollah Khamenei will cave into money. Mayor, thank you. Always a pleasure. Of course, you will be here to explain this to us in the next 2 weeks.
Probably longer than that. We probably need longer than that.
Thank you very much. Could it be a new phase in U.S.-Russia relations and tension? According to the New York Times, the Pentagon is set to move heavy weaponry for up to 5,000 American troops into Eastern European and Baltic countries, a clear message of support to NATO members and a clear warning to Russia. Ori Shapiro explains.
24 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the term Cold War seems more relevant than ever, as the tension between the US and Russia seems to shift to the military sphere. According to a New York Times report which quoted American and European officials, the Pentagon is poised to deploy battle tanks, military vehicles and other heavy weapons for around 5,000 US soldiers in several Baltic and Eastern European countries. The report says the equipment would be kept in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, as well as Poland, Romania, Bulgaria and possibly Hungary. Although the plan has to get approval from the US Defense Secretary and the White House, some European leaders have already voiced their support for it.
I see this decision positively. The threats to the Baltic region have increased. This has been discussed many times. And I positively view that the talking leads to concrete decisions, which, I think, will become a reality.
Similar ideas to place American weapons and defense systems in the Baltic states have been discussed before, but were never implemented due to fears of harming the 1997 agreement between NATO and Russia, which claims that NATO and Russia do not consider each other adversaries. Now, following the series of significant incidents, such as Russia's annexation of Crimea and its involvement in the civil war in Ukraine, American President Barack Obama wants to send a strong message to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin.
He's got to make a decision. Does he continue to wreck his country's economy and continue Russia's isolation in pursuit of wrong-headed desire to recreate the glories of the Soviet Empire?
In the meantime, NATO held a naval exercise in Sweden. More than 5,000 troops took part in the multinational drill aimed at showing the resolve of the alliance's forces to protect the Baltic region. But as the ceasefire in Ukraine seems to be collapsing, perhaps a new chapter may be opening in eastern Ukraine and beyond.
And right now with me, defense and government analyst for Haaretz, a daily newspaper, Amir Oren. Good evening. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Lucy.
Why should he? Why should he send troops to send a message to warm up the already divided, the already, let's say, fragile relationship between Russia and the United States? Why?
It's really pathetic because what you call force or heavy weaponry is nothing but a company here, a platoon there, at most a battalion in some third country.
Oh, we know all about it in the Middle East.
Now, a company is a dozen tanks, 50 men plus some dozens of others for maintenance. It's nothing. Now, the weaponry itself is going to be in storage, guarded by the locals, so that Americans will not have boots on the ground. If they are needed, if the Americans are needed to fight somewhere, they will fly, probably first class, from the United States, and marry up with the weapons and drive to the front. Nobody really expects it. So it has a domestic undertone in the States, Obama versus the Republicans, and in the NATO alliance, which must find some reason for being.
You know, when you explain it in this way, it sounds really reasonable. Okay, you know, when you will need, we will come, we will assist. Vladimir Putin sees this in the let's say, really tolerant way that you're presenting it?
Yes, of course, because all through the Cold War, the Americans had the luxury of not fighting at home. They fought in Korea, in Vietnam. They had large military presence in Europe. But for the Europeans, the war was going to be fought on their soil. So the Americans and the British, by the way, had huge armies, huge armored divisions stationed in Germany, mostly. Now they have taken all of them out. Even recently, they have downsized. And this is only a show of force, but a show of a small force. So it's nothing, and Putin is not afraid of it at all.
Yes. I wonder what Putin is afraid of.
You probably.
I don't think so. Nobody's afraid of me. Amir Oren, thank you very much.
Lucy.
Few events in recent memory have shocked Israeli society as much as the abduction and murder of 3 Jewish teens by Hamas terrorists outside a West Bank settlement last June. Friday marked exactly a year to the day of the kidnapping, which sparked a chain of reactions that eventually led to all-out war. Shai Ben Ari reacted and retraced the route of the abduction with a Bedouin IDF tracker. Here's the report.
This last weekend marked a full year since the abduction and murder of Naftali Frankel, Gilad Shaer, and Eyal Ifrach, 3 teenagers whose deaths triggered a series of events that eventually led to the outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas. The boys were taken on June 12, 2014 from this bus station outside the settlement of Alon Shvut in the West Bank, where they were attempting to hitch a ride. Sergeant Major M is an IDF tracker who was involved in the search effort for the 3, which went on for 18 days.
The boys got in the vehicle which they thought was giving them a ride to Beit Shemesh. As events unfolded, they realized they had gotten into the wrong vehicle. From here, the terrorists attempted to throw off the pursuit by heading towards central Israel.
But soon enough, the abductors changed course.
The terrorists' vehicle came down from the Alon Shvut intersection to here, where, according to police and others, they turned around and headed back in the direction of Hebron. That night, if you recall, was the beginning of the World Cup. There was a kiosk owner at the intersection down the road who was showing the games on a screen. So I think they may have seen the other cars gathered and turned the car around to head back toward Hebron.
On the way back, the vehicle passed the abduction point again, going the opposite direction before heading south. Eventually, the car made its way into the town of Chalchul, slightly to the north of Hebron. Sergeant Major M has been serving in this sector for 9 years. He, like most other IDF trackers, is a member of the Israeli Bedouin community. While some Bedouin tribes are hostile towards Israeli authorities, others openly encourage service in the IDF. M's full identity remains classified to protect him from reprisals.
We serve voluntarily. We work by visual recognition, anything that we are able to capture visually. For example, tracks, footprints. We are able to follow over long distances. They entered Khalkhul and apparently they switched vehicles here, burning the original stolen vehicle to create a decoy and leaving it in a separate location. We searched fields, houses, caves, until we finally found them near a terrace on land, which it later turned out belonged to one of the abductors.
The bodies were found just beyond this ridge. The village of Khalkhul, where this sad episode came to its conclusion, remains a focal point of Hamas support, as does the surrounding area, even now a year after. Indeed, over the past 12 months, there have been numerous violent incidents in the surrounding communities. This situation, unfortunately, is likely to remain as it is, so long as a political solution continues to elude both the Palestinians and Israelis. Shai Ben-Ari, I-24 News, Khalkhul.
And with me right now is military correspondent Shai Ben-Ari. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. So, Shai, you know, I just spoke at the beginning of this edition with Colonel Camp, and I asked him if there is some kind of a change in the approach of Israel after Operation Protective Edge, not only by the approach to the international community, but it seems that also for the approach about kidnapping and soldiers who are being kidnapped and people who are being kidnapped in Israel.
Right, indeed. A year after, you know, there's some things that have stayed the same, I would say, certain patterns that we're seeing, and some things certainly seem to have changed in terms of the approach of both the government and perhaps the Israeli public in general. It's interesting to talk, as you mentioned, about the attitude of the Israeli public towards the issue of abductions of soldiers specifically, you know, following the national trauma that was experienced in Israel after the Gilad Shalit prisoner exchange deal, which was on a ratio of, you know, thousands to one. The very strength of the Israeli reaction to the abduction of these three teens could be understood in that context. You saw a real fear that this scenario could perhaps be repeating itself 3 times over. And it is interesting to note that at this point in time, you know, Hamas has in its basically is holding the remains of 2 dead Israeli soldiers, Oren Shaul and Hadar Goldin. And there is no real public movement in Israeli society calling for the release. This is a very different situation from the past.
Which puts Hamas in a really difficult situation, which puts Hamas in a situation where it doesn't have any other side to deal with.
No cards up its sleeve.
That's it. And it changed also the position of Hamas inside.
Right, indeed. You're seeing all sorts of different internal threats. This is not exactly new, but it's a very interesting dynamic that we're seeing now. Interesting that there are certain similarities to last summer when we saw 3 members of Hamas's military wing basically go against the political leadership to carry out the abduction. We're seeing a similar dynamic, not by internal, in terms of internal disputes within Hamas, but now there's a Salafist organization which has been claiming responsibility for the recent rockets, an organization that is linked in one way or another to the Islamic State, no less. They seem to be pressuring Hamas to consolidate their own position, and Hamas is now finding itself in need of suppressing this. It's still finding itself also the target of Israeli strikes.
Yes. You know, history repeats itself, but in a really interesting situation, and really in this interesting dynamic here in the Middle East. Thank you very much, Shai, for this.
Problem.
Thank you. And we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and I'll be back with the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. 2 minutes. The Israeli government publishes a report on last summer's Operation Protective Edge in Gaza intended to preempt a UN probe on the war expected to be released this week. Benjamin Netanyahu calls it a waste of time. As Sunni rebel groups continue attacks on the Druze community in Syria, Israel is said to be weighing a buffer zone inside Syrian territory to provide humanitarian assistance to Druze fleeing the fighting. And the African Union Summit gets underway in Johannesburg with a range of crises in the focus. South Africa issues a temporary ban on Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir for leaving the country after the ICC calls for his arrest over war crimes in Darfur. Welcome back to the news today. We've been reporting on Syria and Israel's Druze minority, on the community's place in the Syrian war, and Israel's concern over its Druze citizens. Now Israel is asking the United States to boost its aid to the Druze there, and is reportedly planning a buffer zone in which to host Druze escaping the war. Amjad Abu Arafi and Ayman Siksik have more.
In Syria, a threat of near extinction is looming over the Druze minority, which resides in Suwaida, a mainly Druze city located in southwestern Syria, near one of the strongholds of the Islamic State in the country. The recent advance of the IS along the borders of the Druze community has concerned members of the Druze leadership outside Syria as well, in Lebanon and Israel. Recently, calls for Israeli intervention in favor of the Druze have grown.
Having approached several countries, including the US, we can now say that the Druze community will not sit idly by. A strong response will come.
Though Israel will not intervene militarily in Syria, it will provide humanitarian aid to relieve the crisis of the Druze community. Reports in the Israeli media say Israel is planning a buffer zone within Syrian territory to provide aid for the Druze. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has so far ignored calls to protect the Druze minority in his country, prompting what could be a violent response.
I call on you, brave citizens of Sweden, to stand with your brothers. We will not be the victims of the government. The government is supposed to protect us, but instead we have been protecting it.
Meanwhile, in the north of the country, the Al-Nusra Front says it regrets killing 20 Druze people in Idlib last week. But for the Druze community, things seem to be only getting worse, as they are caught in the crossfire between Syria's warring factions, with the IS threatening their existence.
Yes, and right now here in the studio with me, a very special guest. Actually, usually he broadcasts just in the same time, only in the Arabic channel, I-24 News Arabic anchor and editor, Firas Hamid. Good evening.
Hi, Lucy.
Firas, why we are bringing you here? Because maybe you, better than anyone, know about the situation. You are a Druze from the Galilee in Israel, but your brothers and sisters are fighting in the Golan Heights. And this is a really complicated situation.
Yes.
Because if we're talking about loyalty, there is the loyalty to Israel from the Druze in the Galilee, and there is the loyalty to the Syrian government in the Golan Heights. How this is working?
In the beginning, I'm happy that we are the first time we're talking about the Druze community in Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. But if we talk about this situation, it was more complicated before this Syrian crisis. The Golan citizens in Golan Heights was his own loyalty for the Bashar regime, and they are in occupied. They said that they are in occupied land. The Galilee, the Druze faith said that we have to be loyalty for our regime, our land, and our regime. Here in Israel, we are loyalty for the Israeli government. In Lebanon, they are loyalty for the Lebanese regime. In Syria, the same for Bashar Assad. But when the Syrian crisis started, it's different thing. But Assad, the last 1 year, it started to be more, we can say it, more cruel with the Syrian people in Sweden and another in Golan Heights, and they left the Druze. He left the Druze.
But wasn't he supposed, because he saw that the Druze were so loyal to him, wasn't he supposed, was supposed to be the first community that he was supposed to,
But we have to say that Assad lose power. He cannot defend the Druze in Syria. He cannot defend himself in Syria. He lose Tadmor. He lose everything. He lose Aleppo. He lose Homs now. He lose Idlib. He lose everything. He cannot defend himself. So the Druze community, it's like 1 million people in Syria, and they was very loyal for the regime, and Assad know that. And now he is also in complicated situation like Israel. Now in complicated situation.
Explain to me this complicated situation
the Druze
of Israel.
Now the Druze blame the Israeli government that he support Jabhat al-Nusra in the
The
Golan.
Druze in the Golan Heights are actually
also
blaming Israel for supporting Jabhat al-Nusra, which is against Assad, which is, let's say, a link to...
And Jabhat al-Nusra now surrounded all the Druze mountain in Syria or Sweda area in Syria. And the Druze said also in the Galilee, they said that Israel support Jabhat al-Nusra. And it's weird for people that fight for Israel. They died for Israel. And
I'm just trying to understand what stands behind the decision.
I have to say something about the buffer zone. Buffer zone that Israel want to build in the Golan Heights. It's area that will be to Jabhat al-Nusra. Because this area, buffer zone, if you see the news, you will see that the buffer zone, it's the area where Jabhat al-Nusra was. They are there. And if you go to the Syrian border, Israeli-Syrian border, you will see soldiers, we cannot say soldiers, fighters from Jabhat al-Nusra meeting with the Israeli soldiers. it's weird and it's complicated situation for Israeli government. If you remember, before 1 month, Israeli decide that the Druze unit will be kicked out. You can say kicked out.
Kicked out, yes.
Because they're afraid that the Israeli will help their brothers in Syria. Maybe they will use this unit.
You will see a situation where the Druze and the Galilee will go and fight for their brothers in the Golan Heights?
Yes, I will tell you from the reality. I was in the north. I am a Druze guy. I came to my mom. It's my mother. I came to my mother. She prepared for me. She said to me, you have to go to Syria if our brothers and our families get a... Need us, really need us. It's not discussion in the Druze community because our faith said that we have to be loyalty for our brother, if it's in Brazil or in Lebanon or in Syria, to our land. No border can stop us. Nothing can stop us. Everyone know in Lebanon and Syria that the Israeli Druze have also experience in the army, the good fighters. So we are in complicated situation.
Yeah, you know that I have an editor that is pushing me to go for the next item, but we're not. We will stop you here in I-24 News to go.
You can invite me more. We are neighbors.
We will stop you at I-24 News to go and fight. We're not sending you to fight so quickly.
Okay. Thank you,
Firas Hamid, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you. The crisis in Yemen persists, and 1 day before peace talks are set to open in Geneva, Houthi forces seized the capital, Al-Hazam, of large desert province on the border with Saudi Arabia. A Saudi-led coalition has been carrying out an operation for nearly 3 months to try and restore exiled President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi and pushed back Iran-backed Houthis. The African Union Summit opened today in Johannesburg with a range of issues on the table, from the ongoing crisis in Burundi to the threat posed by Islamist groups. But so far, one man has taken nearly all the attention: Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who is the target of an ICC arrest warrant over war crimes in Darfur. Ayman Siksik has the details.
In a rare appearance outside Sudan, President Omar Hassan al-Bashir attended the African Union Summit in Johannesburg on Sunday, amid a potential diplomatic fallout between Africa and Sudan. The reason? A 2009 warrant for the president's arrest from the International Criminal Court. Sudanese officials were quick to discredit reports that the president's freedom may be in danger.
We want to confirm to you that the matter until this time is just media rumors and published by different media, and that there is no risk to His Excellency the President.
Al-Bashir is wanted by the ICC over alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in the conflict in Darfur, which has claimed more than 400,000 lives and displaced more than 2 million people. Al-Bashir rarely leaves Sudan to avoid the possibility of arrest by ICC member states around the world.
His Excellency the President will return at the end of the main session, be it today or tomorrow.
Darfur has been in conflict since 2003, when rebels took up arms against the government. But the political turmoil in Burundi and the recent tirade of racist attacks in South Africa are also likely to feature heavily in the Africa Summit. The ICC said in a statement from its headquarters that it calls on South Africa to spare no effort in ensuring the execution of the arrest warrants against Bashir. On Monday, judges are expected to hear an application for Bashir's arrest, though the South African government has granted legal immunity to all African Union delegates.
And with me right now via Skype is journalist Andrew Green in the Kampala, Uganda. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me, Andrew.
Thank you.
So, Andrew, you know, this summit was supposed to deal with so many issues on the table, and this specific thing is taking all, let's say, the concern of this summit, is taking all the attention from it. And I wonder, where are the real issues on the table and how they're going to be dealt with when everybody's occupied with this?
Well, that's a good question. And, you know, you're already seeing a lot of people speculating that at least this works in a lot of African leaders' interests. You know, it's deferred attention from the xenophobic attacks in South Africa. It's pulled attention away from the ongoing unrest in Burundi and the fighting in South Sudan. And it does raise a good point about whether there's actually going to be time to address those issues now.
So basically, what is the current situation that he is facing? He cannot get out of this summit?
Well, we've just seen reports that the information minister in Sudan, in Khartoum, has reported that he's actually left, and no one's seen President Bashir in the last 20 or 30 minutes. So there's some speculation that he has actually left South Africa, although it's not confirmed at this point. And there is a court order saying that he's not allowed to cross the border. So it raises a really delicate, puts the South African leadership in a really delicate position right now.
You know, I want to talk to you exactly about this, the South African leaderships, about all the presidents that came to go to this summit, and basically seeing this specific situation. Is this some kind of we can say, a move that threatens them or prevents them from doing any further actions in the future against their own people? Or they're saying, you know what, you don't know anything about us, you don't know what is happening in our countries, you are not allowed to come and tell us not to act in the way that we're acting?
Yeah, I mean, it raises a lot of issues about the relationship between African countries and the ICC. In the past, South Africa, which is a signatory to the ICC, had said that they would uphold the arrest warrant, but we're not seeing President Zuma of South Africa actually come out and say that he's going to do that. You're just seeing the High Court considering this. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Zuma not to uphold the ICC indictment, not to deliver Bashir, because you have the majority, a large number of African leaders who don't support the institution and want to see them stop meddling in affairs that they say are internal to the continent.
Yes, Andrew Green, thank you very, very much for this conversation with us. In northern Syria, Kurdish forces are advancing on the town of Talibiyad, an Islamic State stronghold. Amid the fighting, some 1,500 Syrians attempted to flee into Turkey, where tens of thousands have already sought refuge. But Turkey's policy vis-à-vis Syrian refugees has recently changed and means most are now being turned back. Uri Shapira has the story.
Syrian refugees find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. On Saturday, hundreds of refugees, most of them Kurds who escaped the fighting with the extremist jihadist group the Islamic State, were being scattered by IS fighters as they approached the Syrian border town of Al Abayed, where a fierce battle is taking place between the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia and the IS. In the meantime, Syrian asylum seekers who approached the Achadale border fence, which leads to Turkey, were pushed back by Turkish soldiers who used water cannons to stop the refugees from crossing the border. This comes as the policy towards refugees in Turkey seems to be changing. Last Wednesday, Turkish Deputy Minister Numan Kurtulmuş, who visited the border crossing, said his country will not accept entries to his territory from Syria except in case of humanitarian tragedy. This change of policy caught many of the asylum seekers off guard. Many of them are now trying to find alternatives for the refuge. One possibility is Turkey's neighbor, Greece.
We're trying to find any country who will receive us. That's it. Because, you know, we lived in the war and we ran away from there.
According to the UN refugee agency UNHCR, the number of refugees and asylum seekers in Turkey in 2015 is expected to rise to nearly 1.9 million. In the last 10 days, the Turkish Health Ministry reported that at least 13,000 people fled from Syria to Turkey. But it seems that Turkey's open-door policy for refugees is slamming shut.
And we're going to Britain. Britain is said to have pulled MI6 agent out of operations in hostile countries after Russia and China cracked top-secret information from files leaked by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. According to a report by the Sunday Times, the documents contain details of intelligence techniques that could identify spies. Here's I-24 News correspondent Danny Swabel.
In what has resembled something of a Hollywood spy movie or a James Bond film, Britain's security service MI6, which operates overseas and is tasked with defending British interests, has been forced to remove agents immediately from what are considered hostile countries due to leaked information. According to the Sunday Times, who have cited unnamed officials at the office of British Prime Minister David Cameron, spy agencies in Russia and China have cracked top-secret encrypted documents leaked by former U.S. National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden, which contain details of secret intelligence techniques that could allow British and also American spies to be identified. A spokeswoman at Prime Minister Cameron's office declined to comment when contacted by Reuters, and representatives from the British intelligence services did not respond to requests for comment.
God bless you. God bless you.
This comes as U.S. President Barack Obama vowed only last week to boost U.S. cyber defenses amid signs of Chinese hacking, but his administration is likely to move cautiously in response to any Chinese role, mindful of the potential harm from escalating cyber warfare between the world's two largest economies, whose interests are closely intertwined. As it stands, the United States wants Snowden to stand trial after he leaked classified documents, fled the country, and was eventually granted asylum in Moscow in 2013.
And we're shifting to economy. With me right now here in the studio is Niamh Ellis, the reporter for the Jerusalem Post. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You know, if Tsipras was willing for or asking for a miracle, it didn't happen. And it seems that the situation in Greece is just deteriorating each and every day more and more.
Absolutely. For 4 months now, they've been negotiating, Greece versus the European Union, or really the ECB, the IMF, its creditors, in very hard negotiations. And we've seen deadlines come and go, come and go. Now it looks like this might be the real one. Of course, every time you pass one, there's another one down the road.
Of course.
But we've once again come to a point, and now it's looking very difficult for Greece because on Thursday, the IMF was sitting there and said, you know what? We're done. We're going to go. We don't think that this is going anywhere. Their delegation left negotiations in Brussels. In Germany, their economy minister, who at the beginning was saying we need to talk, we need to negotiate, was coming out in the newspaper and saying Greece might just have to exit the euro.
Didn't he get out and said to the world that he has the money, he will pay the debt, and everything is okay? So what? He's lying to his voters, he's lying to his people, and he's lying to the world?
It's a little bit more difficult than that. It's that he has these promises that he made to the Greek voters, that he was going to raise the minimum wages, that he was going to keep their pensions, that he was going to not raise their taxes. And these are all things that go into opposition of what the euro creditors want him to do. He needs to do all of those things by their demand if they're going to bail him out. Otherwise, they're going to run out of money. They have an IMF payment of 1.5 billion euros due at the end of the month. They have about 7 billion worth of bonds they have to pay through the end of the summer to other creditors. And the only way that Europe is going to bail them out and help them is if they agree to all of these reforms, which could hurt their economy, which would break all of their promises. So they're in a very tough spot.
Can we imagine a situation that Europe will tell them, we're giving up on you, now deal with it by yourself?
So we're seeing that there are more and more signs that they are saying that. There are reports that German Chancellor Angela Merkel is at that point and says this is inevitable. And this week on Thursday, which is considered one of the big possible deadlines, there's a finance minister meeting for the Eurozone leaders, and they are saying that on the agenda for the first time is how do we deal with Greece leaving the euro.
Unbelievable. Niamh Ellis, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
A heavily armed man who tried to take on the entire Dallas Police Department this weekend is dead. More from ABC News.
The fiery end of the line to a would-be one-man war on Dallas police. Inside the blasted, burned-out shell of his armored van, the body of James Boulware stopped dead by a police sniper's bullet. His attack began with a midnight blaze of gunfire aimed at Dallas Police headquarters.
Who's it going?
Boulware sprayed police headquarters with a hail of gunfire, bullet holes in windows and patrol cars, grim witness to his murderous intent.
We believe this suspect meant to kill officers.
Boulware wasn't done. He used his massive van as a battering ram against police cruisers, then led others on a chase across town. He stopped and a standoff began. By 4:30 in the morning, a bomb robot picks up a suspicious package. There are pipe bombs inside. 30 minutes later, a sniper shoots out the engine block of the van, making sure it's not going anywhere. Then,
our SWAT snipers shot at the suspect through the front windshield of the van, striking the suspect.
The bomb squad blew up the van the suspect had boasted was packed with explosives. Astonishingly, the gunman was the only casualty. Boulware was reportedly enraged at police, blaming them when he lost custody of his son.
He said, I've lost everything I have, and I got nothing left, and they've taken my son.
Boulware's van was an armored assault vehicle that had once belonged to a sheriff's department in South Carolina. Richard Cantu, ABC News, New York.
Now we're going back to Israel. Now a look inside a special unit operation inside Israeli prisons. The Nachshon was founded over 4 decades ago and is responsible for everything from transporting prisoners to preventing uprisings and rehabilitating inmates. Let's see the reports.
Ayalon Prison, one of the largest detention facilities in Israel. At 6 a.m., the soldiers of the Nachshon unit are ready to go. Brigadier General Menashe Ganish is the commander of this elite unit and its 1,100 wardens. With 30 years of experience, he knows how to ensure security behind his walls.
Nachshon is the special operations unit of the Israeli prison service. All the inmates who are brought to Israeli court are taken care of by our unit. In Europe or in the United States, prisoners are much less transported from their cells to the court.
Before being brought to trial, these prisoners here are taken into temporary cells, according to the charges they're accused of. Wearing brown suits are those accused of terror. Wearing orange are prisoners being prosecuted for criminal charges. It has become a ritual. 50 buses leave Ayalon prison every morning to transport the convicts to civilian and military courts. Here, both wardens and prisoners know the drill.
Prisoners who need to be isolated are placed here. They might be targeted by their cellmates, or they might try themselves to hurt others. This is why we have this closed compartment inside the buses.
Inside the prison, nobody is armed. Once this barrier is lifted, the wardens retrieve their weapons. They might face a jailbreak attempt at any time.
This year, we dealt with 2 terror attacks. The first one took place in Jerusalem. The second one, as you remember, happened in Tel Aviv. 4 of our combatants chased down and neutralized a Palestinian terrorist who had stabbed several people in a bus. The fact that we're deployed across all Israeli roads allows us to help the police enforce the law.
Nachshon also has a special canine unit. The dogs are trained for all kinds of situations, from a stabbing attack inside a bus transporting convicts, showing their ability to act inside small spaces, to a jailbreak attempt using tear gas, all the way to a shooting attack against a prisoner's convoy. The soldiers of the Nachshon unit travel over 30,000 kilometers a day, with more than 1,800 prisoners on board. In the past 20 years, only 2 inmates managed to escape.
And to an amazing story. 4 years after being diagnosed with ALS, Shai Rishoni is as active as ever, heading an NGO, developing an award-winning application, and creating an unprecedented ALS research database. Ahead of the Global ALS Awareness Day, Shahar Peled brings us this amazing story of one incredible man.
For the past 4 months, Shai Rishoni hasn't been able to speak. A recent operation allows him to breathe, but denies him his voice. The sound of his rhythmic breathing and the stiffness of his body does not reveal the relentlessness of his mind, which remains more vocal than ever.
Technology is what we have until there is a cure. When I am connected, I don't even remember I have some limitation. When I am not connected, I am miserable. The communication is so important. Without it, I don't want to live.
In an inspiring display of resilience, Rishoni, who suffers from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, continues to be the leader he was before the disease locked him inside his own body, communicating via computer operated with his eyes.
I was a colonel, a pilot, the trekking guide in the Himalayas, an Ironman with MEA. Just living great life to kids. One day I started to notice my hands are not strong like they used to. Things became difficult.
Over a decade into the 21st century, not much has changed with understanding of the disease.
Doctors still have to tell ALS patients the same thing they told Lou Gehrig 70 years ago. That the disease will slowly destroy all of their muscles while leaving the mind intact.
Although rapidly exposed to the disease through icons like Professor Stephen Hawking, the world still doesn't know enough about ALS, with no way yet for a cure or a treatment. Rishoni is set on a mission to change that.
We just recently won the Genesis Generation Prize for the development of a revolutionary application that will monitor disease progress via your smartphone. Once we start using the application, we will have within a few months more data on ALS than in the whole history.
Rishoni's NGO strives to find breakthroughs in the research of ALS and increase awareness of the disease to find a cure. Since his diagnosis in August 2011, an annual race named Friends for ALS takes place in his hometown, where people run for those who can't, and all donations are tunneled to the study of the illness. This year, in addition to the race, a new initiative will take form straight out of Rishoni's unstoppable ideas.
The Global Hug is an initiative to have a mass hugging act all over the world at the same day, June 21st, the Global ALS Awareness Day. I was looking for something that cost no money and will have a global effect. For one moment, the people with ALS will not be alone in their fight.
Somehow, Rishoni remains an eternal optimistic and continues to struggle daily towards the solution.
It will not be in my life, but we are getting closer. My motto is winning is a way of life.
Just to correct my mistake, incredible, amazing, and unbelievable. This is who he is. We're going out for a small break, and we're going for 10 minutes. Of course, updates from our flash desk, and then we will be back for the third part of the news today. Don't go anywhere. An update, and we'll be back. Welcome back to the news today. We go now to an event on Friday that has created a major controversy. During a demonstration in the Palestinian refugee camp of Jalazoun, clashes erupted between Palestinians and forces from the Israeli Netzach Yehuda battalion. A video surfaced showing a soldier cursing at a Palestinian man who the forces claim tried to touch his gun. It evolves into a larger altercation, some of which is seen here. Let's see it. And today, the soldier seen cursing was sentenced to 30 days of detention. The two other have been sentenced to 28 days in prison. And with me right now here in the studio is Ze'ev Ben Shachar, Director of Israel Education at Jerusalem U. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Good evening. And Mr. Avshalom Vilan, founder of Israeli Peace Movement, Peace Now. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Good evening. You know, some people who are seeing it here in Israel, and I saw a lot of comments on this video, and I saw this video on Friday, and it hurts. It really hurts to see this, but some people are saying these soldiers are under great pressure each and every day. They're 19, 20, 18 years old who are being put in a really difficult situation, a situation sometimes that they cannot handle, and sometimes it comes to a point where they blast, and we're seeing this kind of images. Can we actually blame these soldiers?
First of all, it's true. The situation is impossible by all means. But having said that, nothing to do with the soldier behavior. A human being is a human being. A moral code is a moral code. And such a way of behavior that an unarmed man get such a kind of a treatment by Israeli soldiers, it's against any norm. I think that it's against, first of all, Israelis as human beings, and furthermore, from political point of view, from even military point of view, it's things that totally are not done. It's against, and I think that we have to condemn them. I think the Israeli military forces, what they decided to send those soldiers was the right thing to do. But furthermore, I think to continue such a situation without any kind of political perspective brings people to such a kind of behavior that we are all paying the price of such kind of things. And as a person, as a soldier for many years in the past, I don't remember that we, in our term, had such a kind of hate feelings that you see in the behavior that we saw in this video. Meaning, we have to ask ourselves what's going on.
You don't remember this, or there were no cameras around to actually document it?
No. I think that in the past, and I'm talking about 30, 40, or 20 years ago, it was something that it was the connection was not so involved that it's today that what we saw over there is some kind of personal haters that in our time it was not.
I will take you back to the first Intifada just after I'm asking you. You know, I'm seeing these images. Today Israel sent a report claiming that it's going out against Hamas and against what it's doing in the Gaza Strip, and we are seeing this kind of video. This kind of video when two soldiers are cursing, are hitting, are actually look, these images, how can you explain these images to the world? 1, 2, 3, 4 soldiers who are basically hitting a man that has no ability to defend himself.
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate what we see in these 3 minutes. But it's even more unfortunate that we don't see the hours of violence and riots that were perpetrated against the Israeli army before that. They were throwing firebombs, they were throwing rocks, which in the past have killed Israeli civilians and soldiers. There's a much larger context, and this specific soldier approached this specific Palestinian approached the soldier, tried to grab his weapon, provoked him.
Yeah, but to try to grab his weapon when we see 5 other soldiers surrounding him, and this guy is the only guy who's there, this is a little bit not realistic that this guy will be able even to do something unless they suspected that he has some kind of, I don't know, explosive on him, which we are not seeing here, because if he had explosive...
We don't know that, of course.
No, but if he had explosive, he would have exploded himself, like, really just a time before. But look how many soldiers on one person.
Again, I think a more accurate and a more responsible way of showing this is to show what provoked these soldiers. And, once again, these soldiers were trialed and punished by the IDF. They were trialed and punished, 4 soldiers, for the verbal assault and for this behavior. Now, this kind of a behavior might happen in the future as well.
Exactly, and I'm trying to understand what is the root of this behavior, because I am seeing the hatred feelings that there is among Jews and Arabs. I'm seeing the hatred feelings that there is among Arabs towards Jews, and the amount of hatred that there is among between Jews to Arabs. What we're seeing here are 18 or 19 or 20-year-old boys. Now, people or students in school that are 16 years old or 15 years old, in 2 years they will be these soldiers. They're seeing this. They're seeing that this soldier was in jail only for 30 days. So this guy that is being raised in an education that you can, hit a Palestinian, not armed Palestinian, they will say to themselves, you know what? I will hit him. I will curse him. I will do whatever I want. At the end of the day, it will cost me only 30 days.
And I think it's the responsibility of the media to educate people and to show them really what happened and to show the larger context. Because we're just seeing 3 minutes of assault. We don't see the back and forth. And we don't see that Israel was acting in self-defense after hours of riots and firebombs, lethal firebombs and lethal attacks against soldiers.
What happened to the IDF in the last few years? What happened to the Israeli society? Because I want to take you back to the first Intifada, where Prime Minister Rabin, late Prime Minister Rabin, and at that time he was the defense minister, he gave an order to break the legs and the arms of the people who will try to protest against the IDF soldiers. So, back then people might broke the arms and the legs of protesters, but nobody saw it. So what is happening? What is exactly the moral code that we're talking about?
There was cameras already. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that were made by later on Prime Minister Rubin, then the defense minister, because I think that a military has to be professional by all means. And such a kind of behavior, it's against any professional norms, moral and professional, that end point, nothing else. But I think that furthermore, the situation that both sides are not believed in any kind of political solution. So it's meaning the simple and the exact meaning, it's me or him, it's me or you. Meaning that thinking in such a way of thinking, meaning that maybe I can do whatever I think I have to do to protect myself, to take the others, not as a human being, that is the enemy, that means that I can take any kind of violent step because this is the rules of the game. And I think that we have to stop in a moment and to think under such circumstances that such a kind of behavior, you can see it almost here and there, every week, every day. Number one, has to be stopped. Number two, I think that without open any other channel, not just to fight each other, but how to understand how to live together and to respect. Even if your enemy, you have to respect him as a human being.
Even if he doesn't respect you.
It's something that the Israeli society had in the past, and I'm a little bit scared that we lost most of it in these very days.
You know, one of the biggest claims that we will hear is that they started it. They started the riots. They are probably, we won't see these kind of debates in a Palestinian studio, that the Palestinians will be a Palestinian that will defend the soldiers. You know, we are more moral than them. But you know what? I'm going to give it a contra, because I'm going to contradict it, because do you really want to put your values, your own values as a state, when you are trying to compare it to somebody else, when you are trying to put your set of values according to somebody else, because they are behaving like that, it means that I can behave also like that?
First of all, we're not behaving like that.
We are.
I think
we are behaving like that.
I disagree. I think that we're defending ourselves, and we just saw 3 minutes here. And I think that making this comparison between Palestinian leadership, between Palestinian rioters, between Palestinian terrorists, and the IDF, that's immoral.
But they are not
that's
terrorists.
Immoral.
These are citizens who are protesting in a violent way, but they are not terrorists.
They're protesting in a violent way.
They are not terrorists.
And they've killed soldiers and
because
civilians in the past.
In that way, you know what I will say about the Ethiopian community in Israel, that they are a terrorist as well, because they attack the police.
I wouldn't go that far.
Because it's the same thing.
I wouldn't go that far, but these kinds of protesters have killed civilians before and have killed soldiers. And I wouldn't go as far. I think it's morally wrong to make that comparison between Israeli soldiers who are protecting themselves and Hamas or Palestinian terrorists that are out there to target as many civilians as possible.
We're forgetting always that Israel is still occupying the
one last point. We are the strongest power. We call ourselves the most moral military forces on earth. Come on, it means something. It means values. It means behavior.
Expect ourselves to be a perfect army, and I think sometimes the media has this impossible expectation.
Yes,
I don't look at the media. I look at
unfortunately,
ourselves. What we have to do, not the media has to do.
Yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to ask ourselves if we are better or not. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for this. And a British couple, George and Doreen Kirby, entered the record books on Saturday as world's oldest newlyweds. With a combined age of 194 years, George and Doreen got engaged on Valentine's Day after living together for almost 3 decades. George is 103 years old, and Doreen is engaged, is age 91. They tied the knots in front of family and friends in the coastal town of Hastings in southern England.
All right, very good, thank you, yes. Bit of a surprise, really.
Hey?
After all this time, getting married again, but
well,
quite happy.
Yeah.
Everybody's been very nice, very
when we get
kind.
married?
Pardon?
When did we get married?
Just we were this morning.
We
just
were?
A while ago,
Ah.
yes.
Well, a reconsideration of the situation.
Yeah.
They've been together for 27 years, nearly 28 years this year. They've been living in whatever you want to call it. And I said to Dad, why don't you make an honest woman of Doreen? But I also wanted to encourage it because I felt that when Dad pops his socks, if he goes before Doreen, because she's only 92 this year and he's 103, as you said, I thought it would be a good idea that we, us as the Kirby family, would bring Doreen into our family and look after her when Dad's gone.
Mazel tov, we were saying here in Israel. And with me right now is the host of I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev. I don't have a lot of time for you.
So let's do it quickly.
Quickly.
Argentina. What? Why?
I knew that you're going to react like that.
We were leading 2-up at halftime. It was 2 at night. I went to sleep. I said 2-up at halftime against Paraguay. We have it. Did we have it? No! They came back. I mean, to equalize the game 2-all, giving up a goal at the 89th minute. Terrible, not terrible, but subpar debut for the Copa America. There we see Messi scoring the penalty.
What is Messi doing in Argentina? What he's not doing in Argentina that he's doing in other places?
It seems like everything in Spain, Barcelona, everything works perfectly. We saw that a week and a half ago. Now, but it's just the first game. There's still 2 more in the group. Let's hope things get better eventually. Good. We should say a good word for Paraguay. They did come back. We have to say that.
Yes, but you cannot say it.
I will. Good luck for Paraguay. Argentina do better. Usain Bolt, subpar performance for him. 200 meters in New York. He did a time of 20:29, which is more than a second slower than his world record pace. It was enough to win, but Usain Bolt himself called it probably one of his worst performances. He won this. This is interesting. Anytime a performance of this kind comes a very short time ahead of the World Championship,
it's like seeing cars on legs.
Exactly. Usain Bolt. But he said it's a slow performance. He still won though.
You have 45 seconds. Game number 5.
Yes,
NBA.
Game 5 of the NBA Finals tonight. Huge game. Whoever wins this is going to take a commanding 3-2 lead. Will LeBron James, he's fatigued, but then again, he is the biggest star in Cleveland. Everything goes to him. On the other hand, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, they go back to their home crowd in Oakland, in California. Will they do it? The answer is later tonight. Very, very interesting.
Very, very interesting. You didn't bring me any flying people, but this time I'm flying out of the studio.
I brought cars on wheels.
And I warmed up the seat for you.
Thank you very much.
Because you're going to just give an update from our news desk. So it's really comfy here.
I'm scooting over.
Jonathan Regev, thank you very much for this.
Lucy.
I will remember that you didn't bring me any flying people. We're
getting
out. This is the beginning of the week. Have a great week. Have a great night from the Jaffa Port. Good night.